Hello and welcome back to FranklinCovey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. That's me. I'm your host for 6 years now, 2 episodes weekly on Tuesdays and Fridays, where we both through video and audio curate remarkable conversations with, quite frankly, remarkable people. FranklinCovey, you know as the world's most trusted leadership firm, established in part by Stephen Covey, the author of the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, 40 years ago, where we help organizations literally from all parts of the world build better leaders, help people become more effective in all of their roles in life. And each week, we like to highlight and have conversations with entrepreneurs, CEOs, artists, creators, entrepreneurs, journalists. Sometimes they're academics. They may have actually experienced some big setback in life, in their career, personally, sometimes traumas. They've lived to not just share about it, but teach through it. And today I am honored to be interviewing one of my sort of journalistic heroes for many decades. I have followed her across her career with BBC. Her name is Katty Kay, and with her colleague and friend Claire Shipman, she has now authored the new book, The Power Code. Listen to this tagline: more joy, less ego, maximum impact for women and everyone. Katty Kay joins us both as the author of this book, as a longtime correspondent with BBC, and as the co-host of the new podcast, The Rest is Politics. Katty Kay, welcome to On Leadership.
Scott, thank you for that nice introduction. So happy to be here.
Oh my goodness, it's always daunting when I'm interviewing someone that has sort of international journalistic fame. And so I have been a fan and follower of yours for many years, watched you across many stations, including, if I'm not mistaken, on MSNBC and Morning Joe, and a lot of different appearances you make. Your podcast is The Rest is Politics. Would you, for the last few people who may not be familiar with your career, would you take a few minutes and rewind a couple of decades? You actually have a remarkable history in terms of where you were raised, the role your parents play in terms of their own career. Bring us forward, after a couple of minutes, to where you started and how you got to where you are now.
Well, I love the fact that you're so humble about being daunted, says the man who has done 6 years of podcasts twice a week doing these leadership interviews. So I was actually raised mostly in the Middle East. My father was a British diplomat, and I was brought up traveling, as children of diplomats always are, moving every 3 years. At one point, I think I reckoned that I went to 6 different schools in 5 countries in 2 different languages, which I think in the space of just my teenage years, which I sort of remarkable that I can read and write. So I had the travel bug. And then when I left university, I went to Oxford and studied French and Italian, which is kind of lovely, studying medieval literature, but kind of useless. I spent a year at the Bank of England thinking I should learn how to properly discuss economics. I realized they disliked me as much as I disliked them. And I left after a year and went and worked in Africa, in Zimbabwe, for an aid agency. And about halfway through my time in Zimbabwe, a friend of mine who was a journalist, a British journalist, came out and stayed for a holiday and said, "This is amazing. There are so many stories. You should be telling them on the BBC. And here's a little tape recorder, and that's the record button." And so I started out in journalism that way, and I went to Tokyo and lived there for a few years as the BBC's correspondent in Tokyo in the mid-1990s. And I came to Washington in 1996, assuming I would do what I had always done all my life, stay for a bit and then move on. And here I am, my goodness, nearly 30 years later, and I'm still living in Washington. And I have worked for the BBC, I've worked for the London Times, I have spent some time working full-time, sometime not working at all as I was raising children. I have 4 kids, one of whom was born in Tokyo, the other 3 were born in America. And I've kind of done that thing that a lot of women do of juggling kids and career. And now I am a TV commentator, and I have a podcast, and I write books on women and leadership. I think that was pretty much under 2 minutes, right, Scott?
That was fantastic. Spoken by a true journalist.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right, who has about 2 minutes
to report. You said 2 minutes, and I gave you 2 minutes.
Not your first rodeo. Okay, you've written several books with your colleague and friend Claire Shipman. 5. That's unusual. I mean, other than like Chicken Soup for the Soul, you don't find 2 authors that collaborate that consistently. What have you found that works so well with you and your co-author, Claire Shipman? Also a household name in the world of reporting and journalism.
Such a great question. So I remember when Claire and I first came up with the idea of doing a book together. And it was in 2008. And we both had very small children. And we would meet on the kind of fringes of kind of Washington press conferences and mutter to each other about how insane this juggle was of being on television all the time, but also having tiny children that we wanted to be with, and this kind of brick wall of kids versus career, and how we didn't want to give up either, but how we'd both taken sort of counterintuitive steps to make it all work. And we decided, well, why not write a book? We thought it was going to be a work-life balance book. It really became a kind of manifesto for the value of women in the workforce. And I remember when we told a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, that we were going to write this book together, and they said, it was a guy, and he said, that's crazy. You know, your friendship will fall apart. You'll never speak to each other again. It never works co-authoring. Claire will insist on one thing in the book and you'll insist on another. And, you know, you just won't manage to make this work. And fast forward 5 books and 16 years later, and we are still very good friends, and we spend a lot of time together. We spend holidays together. Our kids are friends with each other. So I think this has been a relationship that has worked not just professionally, but also personally. And I think part of it is that we've taken our ego out of the equation. I mean, we were both able to say, right, what is the best thing for this book? And if Claire changed something in one chapter, it didn't leave me feeling aggrieved and thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to change something in the next chapter just to kind of assert my will. This really was a collaboration, and I think it's been a really great partnership. I'm so lucky to have found her as a co-writer, and having a co-author forces you to deliver on time, because I know somebody is waiting for the next chapter.
Well, it also forces you to get to know what it's like to be in a professional relationship with you. I mean, we're all in the relationship business. This is, I think, the top leadership competency leaders need to possess, men or women, to know what it's like to build relationships that are mutually beneficial. What have you learned about yourself after having co-authored 5 books with Claire Shipman? Like, honestly, like, what have you learned that you've improved upon or you've matured upon to make you a better leader and coworker?
I think that's a really good way of phrasing it. I mean, I wish, to backtrack a tiny bit, I wish that somebody had told the 20-year-old Katty Kay, who was studying hard for finals at university, that what matters as much in the workplace as the kind of quality of the degree you get or the grade you get on your final paper is being a good coworker, is being somebody people like working with, is being nice. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's being somebody that people enjoy the company of and who collaborates. And no one ever told me that. And I think I was so hung up on my grades. I wish I had focused. It would have given me a little bit more confidence, I think, at that age. What I've learned from it's funny, I wish you could ask Claire this question. I think we've both learned that we have strengths and weaknesses. I'm impatient, and I'm not massively detail oriented. So I tend to be not a perfectionist in many ways. I don't review until it's perfect. And I'm perfectionist about some things in my life, but my writing and my work is not necessarily one of them. I could probably be more perfectionist, and luckily Claire is a perfectionist, so she kind of drives making sure we've always got, you know, our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed, and we've got great through narratives and things hang together structurally. But I'm fast. And I'm super efficient. So if I sit down to write, you know, I can write on the train from Washington to New York, which I spend an awful lot of time on, and I'll go into the quiet car, and I don't very often get writer's block, and I will bang out the words in the chapter that's needed. And I think that has been helpful in terms of kind of keeping us on track. Like, I'll be the one that says, okay, right, we need chapter 1 done now. This is the timetable. We got to backtrack from the deadline. But I think I also get a little impatient, and I think that's, you know, hard sometimes for Claire, because she is needing to be the perfectionist in our relationship, and I'm kind of demanding speed. And so I think, I mean, the great thing is that our skill sets work very well together. And I think it's forced me to be more understanding of the fact that my impatience can sometimes be aggravating to other people and not necessarily helpful to the final product.
Okay, you just described
enough?
You just described my marriage, not your relationship with Claire Shipman. Okay, you know, one of the
It's probably my marriage too. I mean, I suspect people who are impatient, right, Scott? I mean, we're impatient in everything. I mean, I don't think you're suddenly super patient with one thing and then very impatient with another. I fear I'm a little
About
impatient.
400 episodes ago, I told my wife I stopped taping the podcast so that she wouldn't get empowered to learn more about how to lead me or manage me. Okay, one of the premises of your book that was just released a year ago is that you're both on a mission to help women reclaim power. And when I read that and read the book, I kind of stopped and thought, well, when you reclaim power, it assumes you had power. And I wonder if you might sort of riff on this idea around, women are certainly making strides in the workplace. Some would argue the pandemic set them back a generation. Mm-hmm. Some would argue that perhaps even the incoming administration, in terms of what they're doing with DE&I initiatives and the controversy around that, there's a lot of, I think it was, I read where NASDAQ last week has just decided they're not going to, or the Supreme Court or someone is now preventing NASDAQ from reporting or requiring their companies to report the diversity of women on their leadership teams and boards. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of positive momentum in women reclaiming their power. Please challenge me on that and riff on that as one of the premises of the book.
Look, I think all of that is true. And I look at what is happening in terms of backlash against sort of women's empowerment, and it worries me too. I mean, I think we are seeing, and we write about this in the book even, a backlash against the Me Too movement. But I think the long-term trend of history is that women are increasingly gaining positions of power, and that economies are moving in directions that value the kinds of skills that women bring to the table. I mean, put incredibly simply, we're sort of in a brain, not a brawn economy at the moment, right? And women are better educated than men. We have more degrees, we have more postgraduate degrees, we have more PhDs even than men. And this economy values those kind of skills, let alone the soft skills, what were called soft skills. I like to think of them as profitable skills of communication, EQ, reading the room, those kind of skills that women bring to the table. But we wrote this book because we are frustrated with the poor numbers at the very top. I mean, there are not enough women CEOs. There are not enough women leaders around the world. I will be happy when women are kind of 50% of running everything, because I think that's how you get the best business decisions. I think all of the work has been done on this. The academic studies have been done on this, showing that we make better decisions when we have a diversity of opinion and experience around the table. And that is bringing men and women together. I mean, Christine Lagarde used to say, the first female head of the International Monetary Fund, if it had been Lehman Brothers and sisters, perhaps we wouldn't have jumped off that financial cliff as quickly as we did in 2008. And it's not if we'd been Lehman sisters, it's being brothers and sisters. So I think there is a economic and leadership value to having men and women at the very top. Women in Congress, for example, propose more bills, get more bills passed, work in a more bipartisan fashion. So I think that the case for more women in leadership has already been made, but we were very frustrated by the numbers, the poor numbers at the very top. And so we wanted to look at this thing of power. You phrased it as reclaiming power, and I'm not quite sure that's exactly how I would phrase it. I would phrase it more as redefining power, as trying to understand power in a new way that makes it a proposition that is more appealing to women, and therefore more women go for positions of power, but is also, I would argue, this redefinition, and we can get into that, of how we understand power or could understand power differently, is actually better for everybody. It does produce better results. You asked about the cooperation of Claire and I. I think that cooperation that we have brought is partly because we think of power differently. It's not a zero-sum game. And all of the academics we interviewed, and I think we've interviewed almost every academic in the country who is looking at power, says there is a difference between the way men and women have traditionally understood power. And it boils down to the idea that for men it is a finite commodity. More for you is less for me. And whether that is power over resources or power over people or power over organizations, there's an inherent competition there. And women just understand power differently. And I think the case we lay out in this book is that that understanding of power could be useful for everybody.
Katty, I once heard former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who I'm not personally a fan of, and politics aside, I respect her service to our country. I often disagree with her politically, but I respect immensely her leadership skills and her service. And just recently I heard that she had broken a hip in Europe on a delegation trip, and certainly wish her well. Mm-hmm. I once heard her say, and I hope I'm quoting her right, "Power is not given to you, you must take it." And I think it's a pretty accurate quote. And I've kind of thought about that, kind of cogitated on that, if you will. To what extent do you agree with that? As you're coaching and speaking to women, do you find that in organizations that may be historically entrenched in male board positions and male leadership positions, do you find that women need to take power? You might interpret that differently. How do you advise women in terms of taking the initiative to take power versus maybe waiting for some male to bestow it upon them?
So I mentioned Christine Lagarde, who I am a fan of and who has been in so many firsts in terms of women in leadership and is now running the European Central Bank in Europe. And she did say to us when we interviewed her for this book on power that you will have to fight to get power because it's something that is not going to be given up very freely, particularly by men. I mean, there has been this kind of, for thousands of years, being born with a Y chromosome gave you an inherent advantage in the workplace. And there's a whole theory called loss aversion theory, which posits that losing something is more painful to us as human beings, whether it's a date or a new job title or a sweater or power. Losing something is more painful to us than the sort of positive gain that comes from winning something. And I do think when it comes to power, as men feel this shift that is taking place, and yes, there's a little bit of a setback, a kind of speed bump at the moment, but I think there is a kind of, compared to where women were 50 years ago, nobody would argue that we haven't got more power than we had 50 years ago. And I think this loss aversion theory is something that is very useful to understand as we feel these backlashes that come, whether it's from the Me Too movement or against DEI propositions. And I think we should realize that there is something very deep and profound in people not wanting to give up power, who have had power for a very long time. But the flip side of that is that women, and that's why our curious subtitle, we talk about joy, which I think most people probably wouldn't associate with power. I think women have to also have a kind of, that's why we write about this redefinition of power and take a second look at power and what it can do for them and their communities and the value of having it. Because one of the reasons we wrote this book is, first of all, we looked at the numbers at the top. We thought, well, that sucks. I mean, there aren't enough female CEOs. What are we, 10% at the moment? And similar numbers in leadership around the world politically. But there was a great study that came out of Harvard about 4 or 5 years ago that showed that however you define power, women don't want it. And this was a study that was done by an academic who was so surprised by the results that she redid the study multiple times with thousands of people, of women at different stages of their career, different age groups, different socioeconomic groups, and however she defined it, women just didn't want power. The cost of getting it was too high. We had to give up too many of our other things that we value in our life values. And the proposition at the top just didn't look very appealing. So the route to getting it was difficult and costly for us. And then even when you got it, it just didn't look very appealing because power has been kind of designed, this sort of zero-sum competitive nature of power has not been designed particularly with women in mind. So I think that made us think, yes, we do need to kind of actively seize power, but it's not like seizing power in a coup. It's
right.
There's a way of re-understanding power that might make it more. We have to think, what can we do with power? How can we improve our communities? How can we improve our companies? How can we improve our departments at work? If we were in a position of power, and that's this key definitional difference. It's not power over, that zero-sum idea of power. It's power to. What can we do with power? Power to make change. And that then I think is a more appealing proposition to women.
Dr. Covey was a very strong voice in the world of leadership, a personal hero of mine, worked in the firm for 30 years with him. He used to define there were 3 types of power. There was utility power, because I said so. There was coercive power, do it or else. And then there was principle-centered power. And that really is the kind of power you're talking about, is the power of authority because of your character and your competence, your ability to communicate and listen and collaborate and seek third alternatives. And I think Dr. Covey would have loved this book.
Thank you.
You write in the book a lot about the book is also for men. In fact, there's a premise that women will never have parity with men in the boardroom and the leadership positions in the workplace unless the men who have the power both act as sponsors and mentors and allies and champions of women. What would you like to say to all the male leaders that are listening and watching today that are thinking about you and your book with Claire? What can their role, their legacy be in creating parity, really as the legacy they leave the boardroom with to raise women and to share the power if they believe all the statistics, which are companies are more profitable, customers are happier, their impact is better when there is gender parity in the leadership roles of organizations.
So I promise you, we did not think we were going to write a book about marriages. We deal with business and politics and leadership issues. But it quickly became clear to us that we couldn't write a book on power and the redistribution of power if we didn't look at the people who risked or felt that they were losing power. And that, in this case, was men. And one of the pieces of research that we came up with very early on kind of defined how we wrote about men in this book. And that was a piece of research from a census statistician. A third of American women now earn more than their husbands. But this statistician, Misty Hegnes, found that in couples where the wife earns more than the husband, they lie about it on the US Census form. They are so keen to protect the old idea of a marriage, a traditional marriage where the man is earning more, that they will go so far as to lie to a US government on a US government document about their earning capacity. And at first we kind of listened, I thought, oh my God, this is ridiculous. Just get over it, stiffen up your ego. But then we realized, actually, what does that say about how much society wants men to be a certain way? I mean, I think it completely changed the way we think about this equation. If you think about it, Scott, women's horizons have expanded enormously in the last 50 years. I mean, it's socially acceptable for me to work full-time, work part-time, not at all, earn a salary, not earn a salary. Society's fine with all of that. But when it comes to men, there is still a really strong societal expectation that men will be not just the breadwinner, but the primary breadwinner, which is why they lie about it on a census form if their wife is earning more. And I think until that changes, until the aperture changes for men as much as it has for women, then it's going to be very difficult for us to share power. I mean, partly because, yes, women are still doing the vast majority of care at home and to do with children. That has to change clearly. But I think if men could see the value, and if society and organizations and companies could start to value the kinds of caregiving that women do, not just at home, but at work. Who is it that organizes birthday parties, leaving gifts, brown bag lunches, onboarding of interns, all of those things that are not promotable, but are necessary to the smooth and happy organization, running of organizations? It's disproportionately women that do those caregiving activities at home and in the office. I think when society and when organizations and companies start valuing those things as much as they should be valued and giving credit to men for taking part in those things, then actually the power shift will be much smoother and easier, both for women, but also for men. I mean, I think it's terribly sad. The men we interviewed in this book, the man who said to us, a senior law partner in a big law company said to us, he'd quit, a senior academic who had quit his job because he was burned out and his wife became the primary breadwinner. And he said, I felt that I had failed at the one thing I was meant to succeed at. I mean, what a kind of sad position to be in life, that was the one thing he was meant to succeed at, was being a breadwinner and the income earner. And I think that's the equation that needs to change. And actually, we came away from those interviews with men with much more empathy for the position that men are in than perhaps we went into the book and the research when we started it.
Well, I can relate to that. I'm guessing there's some connection to as males, our epigenetics, our origin story of
Yes.
how we were raised to believe what is our contribution as provider, as caretaker. I get it and I don't get it, because my most glorious day will be when my wife out-earns me. I wish every day. I'm like, hun, I'll carry your luggage. I'll do whatever you want me to do.
You
You're
will
up.
not be lying to the census taker.
I won't be lying, exactly. Hey, I know our time is tight. I want to share some insights in the story, in the book. You write, I think it was in chapter 5, you call it Pointless Perfection and Other Burdensome Biases. You write about flawed by design. I think the stat was that 17% of car deaths are higher for women than men because of how cars are designed with male test dummies, and how office environments, temperatures are set more for the male body. And the
That's
book
why
is,
we freeze all summer long.
well,
Women are freezing.
I freeze too, sorry. Your book in no way is an angry book at all. It's a very positive, research-based book. This is not a treatise or a manifesto, but you do talk about things that we don't think about in terms of how lecterns and podiums are designed, and how armored gear is typically designed for male, military and male police officers. Maybe you should just kind of open letter to anybody who's involved in ergonomics, office design, product development, car crash testing.
Right down to the folders for architectural designs, which are far too big for any female architect's arms to actually hold.
And the size of mobile phones, you said, like the gigantic size. So talk a little bit about what is the maybe conscious or unconscious bias of how the world still works in favor of men.
So we put that list in kind of for fun almost, to show the sort of silly things that's done. I mean, the office temperature one is, the temperature of offices was designed in the 1950s, and it hasn't changed since. I mean, this is 70 years later, we're still heating offices to the same temperature, when guess what? It was men dressed in suits who went to the office. So I think it was sort of a bit of, this is the crazy stuff that is still happening. And yes, we need to address those little things. But I think the bigger thing is that we know that women are more prone to perfection from previous work. Our book on the confidence code, we found the research on that women are more prone to perfection than men are anyway. But what we were also trying to address is the artificial barriers that are set up within offices and with company structures that set the barriers consistently higher for women, or make things harder for women than they do for men. And I think those are the kind of more, I hope that we can change the office temperature, because I hate freezing, but those are the sort of more serious hurdles that we need to come. What is it that companies are doing? Is it, insisting that anyone who is applying for a C-suite position has to have spent 4 years running a department, in Asia or Latin America, which is just very difficult for many women, working women with children, to do. So that is one small example. It's an example that comes from real life, from an executive we know in a major American company, who said they were never going to be looked at for the C-suite until they had done that. Well, there are other ways in this day and age that you can get around that. Companies have to get smarter, and yes, it takes a bit more work, and yes, it's a bit more complicated, but it is doable if you buy into the premise that it is better, as you said, and the stats are all out there, it's better for your bottom line to have more women in leadership. Then companies are going to have to get a little bit smarter about removing some of the barriers to entry to the top levels that currently exist. And we kind of enumerate them throughout the book. We wanted the book to be both a practical guide for women. We want women to be able to use this to reassess their own relationship with power, but also to look at companies and what companies can do.
Katty, I have a question for you around your role as a journalist and a media expert. You've been a reporter, a correspondent, an anchor, a host, all of that for, 30 plus years. I feel like the acrimony that exists between government officials and the press is at a fever pitch. And then I think back to the Nixon administration, when either it was Nixon or Spiro Agnew that referred to the press as the nattering nabobs of negativism. So maybe it's not unprecedented. I'm guessing you and your colleagues are kind of gearing up for the next round of antagonism. I mean, between incoming President Trump and litigating against the press and all the fear and all the lies and all the accusation of lies and what is truth, and we could go on and on. How are you feeling about the future of journalism, of your work as a correspondent? Do you feel like citizenry still trusts you well? What are some things that you could do better or different to instill reinstill trust, not just in journalists, but in female journalists? It's a broad question, kind of like, where is your divining rod taking your career, and what do you feel the future looks like?
I think there's no doubt that the public generally has little trust in the media. We see all the numbers around there. I mean, they've got little trust in very many institutions. There are almost no areas of American life or even European life where people still have trust in institutions in the way that they used to. And gone are the days of kind of hierarchical news organizations that could come down from the mount and issue the tablets of news and everybody would consume them and agree and say, yes, we've been given the facts by a legacy news organization, and yes, we're happy to agree with them. And we're living in a very, very different world. I still think there is a real place for fact-based journalism, particularly in the world of misinformation and disinformation that we're living in, and conspiracy theories online. I almost think it's more important than ever that we have organizations where we can go to those organizations and we know there are editorial protocols and we know they're not taking sides, and they aim as much as they can for an objective recounting of the facts. And then you go away and you form your opinion. I don't understand how, in the long run, democracies survive if we live in a world where everybody is just getting their own version of the truth from whatever website it is online or social media platform, and that and we live in a swamp of misinformation. I mean, I think it is that critical, but I don't know what the answer is, because I see that I think the onus is on legacy organizations like the BBC, like ABC News, to make their news offerings more palatable, more exciting, more interesting to the public, because otherwise the public's going to walk away from us and will walk down the rabbit hole of misinformation. And I think so we have to do a better job in how we present the news and the stories we tell, and being transparent and admitting when we are wrong, but keep on just aiming for the facts. I'm more worried about that than I am about this particular period of political tension between administrations and the press.
Beautifully said. 6-time co-author with Claire Shipman, Katty Kay. Your most recent book is The Power Code: More Joy, Less Ego, Maximum Impact for Women and Everyone. What is book number 6 about? Because you know it's coming.
We always take a long time, Claire and I. We went through a long stage of writing about confidence for women and then confidence for girls. And then we wrote about power, not a small subject. And we're kind of, we're in the stage now where we've got that one out. I've been busy, of course, with the Trump administration being re-elected and the elections, and we'll start thinking what's our next big subject. I hope it's going to be something fun. I think we all need a little bit of fun in our lives.
Isn't that true? Katty Kay, special correspondent with BBC, co-host of the podcast with Anthony Scaramucci. The Rest is Politics. Such a delight to talk to you today. Thanks so much, and happy holidays to you.
Scott, thank you so much, and happy holidays too.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.